Hello,
Well,
hello.
hello everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good everything in the beautiful world, wherever you are. It's wonderful Wednesday with our gorgeous Jessie. How are you, beautiful Jess? And of course, Mornay, how are you?
Doing great.
So good to see you, Jess.
Thank
Sorry, I know I've
you.
probably got a bit of a lag here. My fancy fiber internet just decided it's not working this morning. So, what can I say? I'm on my backup, so please forgive any internet issues I will ask you up front. So, Jess, anything exciting happening in your world you want to share with us? Anything you're doing? How's it going on your new channel?
Oh, the new channel's going great, and I want to advertise a few things. This week, we're going to release the course, so that's super exciting, and you'll get copies of that. And then after that, we're going to also have I'll release hopefully by next month second new show. So that one's going to just focus on um, topics specific to the storms that we have in life, whether they're trials, temptations, challenges, and how do we go about addressing those in a biblical way with the authority that God's given us. So that will be super exciting and it's well on it's way. So tonight, if you get to tune in, we're going to talk about bigger fish to fry than the Antichrist. So
Oh, wow.
it's going to be a really good show.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited for that, and really, I'm so happy that you're doing so well with your. I had no doubt that your channel and your courses and everything. I just really have to say I've watched you for the last 2 years that you've been our favorite girl on the show, and it's been amazing to see how many storms you've weathered,
Mm,
and just the people that have sailed with us, the
right.
storminess, the full moon with crazy werewolves.
All
you
the
know,
crazy stuff's going to come out, isn't it, Chantel?
well, I like them stormy seas, honey. So we're in this one. We're on this boat. We're doing it. It's amazing, but it's just so beautiful to see Jessie how you've progressed on your path and in your work. And
Thank
it's just
you.
so wonderful to see how many people are there to support you through thick and thin. And
Mhm.
we know even those that decide we are foe, um, there's never really a foe, just a beautiful friend in disguise. That's the way I
Yep.
see it. So I'm very, very grateful to have you here to talk about underground cities. Now, I know we've
Woohoo.
often touched on them, and I like those kind of little things happening. So I like to know what little gremlins are happening beneath the surfaces of our earth. So very happy to have you here today talking about the underground cities, particularly focusing on Emerald City, Mars, Valhalla, which is Viking heaven as far as I know, and
Yeah.
Ragnarok. Ragnarok.
Ragnarok.
Ragnarok. There we
Yeah.
go. So over to you, beautiful.
Yeah. Well, those are, as you said, those are underground cities. If people want to find out more from the system side on those cities, I've encouraged people to look into the book Initiates of the Flame. That's a high level book for the Brotherhood system, particularly for those who are part of the Order of Melchizedek. And so you have to be in those upper orders. We've talked about that in some previous shows that, as you start to break down the different orders in the system, at the top, you have the Order of Melchizedek. Underneath them, you have the Order of the Phoenix and the Order of the Golden Dawn. Um, so, when they're in those orders and they want to seek even higher enlightenment, the book that they're going to be given to reflect on is Initiates of the Flame by Manly P. Hall. Now, what's interesting is that, this man was a Mason. He's considered the father, the founder of the Masons. And, the first question needs to be, why is this Mason, talking about secret cities? And, why did they bring that out in a book? Why did they want to reflect on that? And, I would propose that it's not just telling mythological stories. These are real places, and I would propose that that book, Initiates of the Flame, is what we call the Brotherhood coded, it's a coded map. It's more than just talking about mythical cities. Like, there are keys in that that tell you where to locate those cities. And why did a Mason need to inform others on how to locate these cities? What's interesting is then you bring in military and other connections, and really, what these are is it's giving much, much more, I'll just say, than, just thinking about or reflecting on things. So a lot of these high level books that we look at that come out of these different groups that are connected to the Brotherhood, so that could be, the Masons, the Kabbalah, the Satanists, the Jesuit Catholics, and the Mormons. A lot of this material is much, much more than just reflections or books to read. So as you look at Initiates of the Flame, I've talked about how in the system, you have people who are like mentors to you. Their job is to guide you, to be teachers. I've referred to a lot of my mentors in the system as my teachers. So that was individuals like Michael Carcock, Lori Cabot-Kent. And, their job is to basically kind of serve as that guiding hand as you're reflecting on things. And they're the ones who will challenge you with questions sometimes. They're also the ones that you go to when you want to find out the answers, but they don't ever directly give you the answer. If I were to ask a question about these secret cities, if I were to say, do these secret cities exist? I would get a response that would be a question back. They would say, do they exist? But if I were to say to them, oh my gosh, I was just reading about Valhalla, and it says in this book, Initiates of the Flame, that you cross Rainbow Bridge, and it says something about Route 66, and oh my goodness, like geographically, there's a Valhalla, Kansas, and it's on Route 66 across Rainbow Bridge. Is that where the underground city for Valhalla is located? And their response would be, do you want to see it? So that's when they would take you to go see it. So what's interesting is that these places are real. And in fact, I just gave the location for Valhalla. It is in in Kansas. And, there's a lot more that goes on in these underground cities. If we're speaking honestly, why does the system have things underground? It's because, for many, many generations, they had to hide the evils that they did. And, what are those evils? That includes, sexual exploitation of children, eating human flesh, torture, satanic ritualistic abuse. That's what happens down in these secret cities. And it's a whole underworld where, basically humans are the main money that the system is buying, selling, and trading off of. And it's not just, our physical bodies, it includes the spiritual bodies as well. How is the military implicated in that? our U.S. military has been involved since after World War II, where they invited, or not, I won't say invited, but where the Nazis came into the United States and began to run a lot of the projects, experiments, and programs through the U.S. military that were being done on humans. So that's how some of those interconnections are. So, you will always see that, these underground cities through the Brotherhood are heavily guarded by the U.S. military and by the system. Um, you know, I would love for other people to come forward about their stories of these cities. It would
Yeah.
really be an interesting conversation. Um, one of the first ones that I brought out was Emerald City, which is located under the Pentagon. And, there's interesting things with it. There are tunnels that are underneath these cities. The things that I remember about Emerald City was that as you go underground, uh, there is a bridge that you have to cross to get into that city. It was on that bridge that I first met what people now call a Palladian. I did not know this being as a Palladian. That term was never used when I was a child. Um, I knew that as an angel, or another term they would use is a morning star. And you have heavenly morning stars and you have earthly morning stars, which morning star is a position that usually the very top level sisters of light in the system are called morning stars. And they're connected to the Sanhedrin. Many of the morning stars work directly under the Sanhedrin and guard not only the underground cities, but a lot of the underground breeder programs. So the morning stars will someday have to talk about more about them, but they get interesting. But that's where I first met those beings, and I was introduced by some of the high level light side of the system, Sisters of Light. What I saw was that I'll just call them the beings because I didn't use that term Palladians, but their job was to teach a lot of the Sisters of Light who were being brought into the system or being raised up in the system how to use light, energy, and song for healing. So, they work a lot with the frequencies, the vibrations, the colors, things like that, in order to bring healing when people need that. So, we're talking very high level somatic magic that they're using. And, it gets interesting. As you cross, go ahead.
Sorry, I just have a question for you. Before we talk about going in there, who funds these tunnels? Do we know?
You get all sorts of high level elite people who fund them. Basically, it goes back to the nations, and I would propose that, a lot of the financial backing comes through the Holy See, which is the financial backer for the Vatican. And they're directly underneath the Sanhedrin as well. So that makes it very interesting when you bring Israel into all of this. But yeah, so as you cross those bridges, there were some very unique things. So I got to say, there's several entrances into the cities. I brought out things about the Frank Lloyd Wright houses. He was not the only architect that built special buildings for the Brotherhood system. There's many other architects who did. they were very skilled at building houses that would have entrances and exits into these underground systems. So I can remember, I'm not going to say the name of whose home it was, but I remember one of the homes that was connected to Emerald City was this, massive big mansion. And as you go down into kind of like the lower levels, I just remember it was like they had this bedroom that really had no walls. As you walked in, the left side was this massive waterfall that went through several floors of the house. Um, and then like there was a bed kind of like in the middle, what you would call the middle of the room. And as you looked out past that, there was this massive rainforest underground. And so that rainforest connects, like if I was on Rainbow Bridge, it would be kind of that left upper side of Emerald City.
Jessie, sorry,
go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to just clarify. So the entrances to, let's say, particularly to Emerald City now, it's not a spiritual entrance, it's a physical entrance. So you're actually going in.
Some are physical, there are some spiritual gates as well.
Okay. All right, cool. That's
so it just depends where you enter in or not. Like some of the ways, like if you go to some of these palaces or castles now that they make into tourist places, usually as you go out into the gardens, or you will see this sometimes in the basements or certain atriums within the houses or certain rooms. It just depends on the place. And I'm going to stop here because I think it's important to kind of talk about the variety of entrances or exits that there really is. So like some of the palaces I went to, like they would have rooms, and you would notice as you look in each room that there's a set of 3 mirrors in every room. Why did they have 3 mirrors in every room? It's because those mirrors are used as entrances and exits. It gives you a 3-way doorway where you can go in or out in either direction. Another thing that you would see usually with that is that somewhere they would have the old telephones. George and I have brought out on the shows that the telephones used to be used for contacting the dead or for seances. So a lot of that would be in conjunction that they're, what really is contact with the dead? It's contact with the spirit world, which, as we talk about entrances and exits, you're not just talking about the physical world, you're talking about dimensional access into the spirit world. So sometimes they would use mirrors. That's why a lot of witches and warlocks will have mirrors, especially black mirrors. Then another thing they would use is you would see literal gates set up. So like some of the places where I went, they had, vast gardens. But then it's like in the, like the middle of the courtyards of the gardens, you would see these actual like gates or entrances or exits set up where it's like, that doesn't make sense. It's like all these weird labyrinths and entrances and exits into them. Those are used during ritual times. They will have, both spirit beings and physical people who will come into the property through those different directions, and then they will exit through those different directions when they need to. And so there, that would be, it's a physical and a spiritual entrance or exit. Sometimes they will have fake doors, where if you were to be at the home and you open this door, you're going to see this brick wall and you're like, why is there just a brick wall? Or, maybe it may even, I can remember one of the places literally, like, you open the door and literally there was a whole nother building like right there. So there was really no way to excessively use that door. So it's like, why do they have a door that just goes into another building, but you don't get entrance into that building from how it looks, you know? So they'll do fake entrances, exits. Um, Oftentimes, stairwells can be used as an access point. Um, they loved using, especially the windy staircases that they would randomly put in the middle of homes, and that those would be used. With those too, they can change shape or direction. So, um, I don't. I guess I want to use the term loosely, but the magic stairwells, that's something that is common. And we do see that even produced. A lot of movies pick up that concept and will use those magic stairwells in movies that deal with witchcraft and other forms of sorcery. Um, so a lot of those things like that really does happen in the real world, that these witches and warlocks use these things to get in and out of places. So yeah, they use real houses, they use real buildings. Um, they purposely will build buildings that have underground tunnel accesses or underground tunnels. Like, that you'll see that in the military on the bases. You'll see that with hospitals, with schools, with the old Catholic churches, where even they went as far as to have incinerators in those basements. Um,
We've heard
you know,
we've heard some people say a lot of the celebrities have got tunnels coming from their houses. Now, I would just want to ask two things. Is it elevators in these castles and palaces and whatever it is you're talking about, as well as these houses of celebrities? I know a very famous one with a starting with the name O.W., Oprah, is often said, has been said to have underground tunnels from her house, and a number of other people as well. Do they use like elevators? How do they get there? And it's like, um, do these tunnel systems that go from their houses, do they all link to these underground cities you're talking about or similar to them, or have they got their own little merry carnival concoction going on privately? Is it all a linked thing? Does it happen privately? I'm just curious.
I think it depends on, individuals and the places in those situations. The answer is some yes and others no. So it really is dependent on, you know, individuals and how high they are, what their position is, what their connection and access needs to be to those things. So it's not everyone across the board. Um, we know that Oprah was and is a high priestess in the system. So as that, she definitely has a lot of interconnections, especially in that, California or Western Quadrant area where her jurisdiction is. And, do I believe that some of those connections even go as far as, her humanitarian work and connections with South Africa? I do. Um, so, it is very individualistic. And elevators, yes, they sometimes do use elevators, especially the old ones, and through different, forms of, I guess, it's really hard to describe how they do that thing with the elevators, but there are missing floors that don't show up, within certain elevators. So even public buildings, like if you go out and count how many floors some of these places have, and then you go into the elevator, you're like, wait a second, there's something off. That they're keeping floors back, but then you have to try to figure out which floor they're hiding. Usually there is a lot with the 13th floor where that floor is hidden from people. But there's other floors as well. And many of these buildings will have subfloors in between the actual floors. And that will be, how those in the system will move from one place to another. So, yeah, it gets interesting with all of that because, the question is then, if they are able to move in the spirit world, why do they not use that all the time? Why do they sometimes use physical things? I don't have the answers to all those questions. That was one of mine too as a kid. It's like, if we're able just to go through a portal, how come we don't do that every time? How come, when we were in Rockford, Illinois, how come there was 5 or 6 different entrances they would use into that underground system and they would shift it? And it's almost like there's um, a pride and what would you call it? Kind of like a elusiveness that they want to tempt fate. They want to, parade before their rituals out in the middle of the night across the grass and through, through the different areas they're going through um, to see if they're going to get caught. It's almost like there's that pride that they want to be actively doing it where they could be seen, but yet they take all measures to try to ensure that they're not seen. And as a kid, it just never made sense to me. It's like, why would you do that? Why do we have to walk through the culvert into the sewer areas to go down into the catacombs this time?
Yeah.
And so there's not direct answers for that. But what I gleaned out of that as a kid was that um, that they made it so that they never, or I won't say never, but they made it so that there were so many entrances and exits, and every time they used a different one. And I believe that that was really to try to cause confusion. It was to try to, make it so that all the children who were involved in these things, if they ever tried to tell, it wouldn't make sense to people. People would say, "Oh, that can't be real because, it doesn't make logical sense. If you, are able to go through a portal, then why would they then go through the graveyard or the culvert?" And so then it makes the children's stories more unbelievable and more questionable.
Yeah.
Or even, sometimes the entrances or things would be so small that they would be like, no, people can't fit through there. There's no way you went through there. Um, so I think some of it is to make it seem unbelievable.
Absolutely. And also just to flaunt their ability to do these things in the different dimensions, right? Just kind of flaunting that. That's also the way I would see that. We can do it like this or we can do it like that. It's kind of like they got everything going for them. Very interesting. Okay, so you get in there, and I know you mentioned you seeing this forest, like an underground forest. I mean, and I think we've spoken quite a while ago, and you mentioned that there's suns, like cities. Tell us what is going on there, please. In Emerald City, particularly.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of, there's underground light, not necessarily even from the sun or the things that are under there, um, which includes stars as well. But um, the way that God has created things, there is a natural light that happens. Um, and so I can't describe that. I can't give people the scientific evidence of that. I'll just say that it's fully operational, that they don't need electricity. They don't have to have all these wires or connection things. They don't have to hook up all those big, wind farms or things like that in order to get energy for those things. Those are more for ventilation because they have to have air under there. If that air quality is bad, of course, then there's already areas in there that have such low oxygen that the regular human would struggle to be under in those areas. So that's why they've got those big fans, so they can keep building those areas deeper and deeper and have air and ventilation for them. But yeah, so that's some of the interesting things about that. And there is a rainforest under there that is part of how they get in that particular city. That's part of how they get the oxygen, because we know that trees produce oxygen. So some of these underground cities, they don't have to find ways to even ventilate or things like that, because there are natural things they use down there to do that. I remember that under there's also a massive cavern, it's like a series of caverns that I believe, if I remember correctly, that they are even deeper than the Grand Canyon. There is some connections as you follow that do connect to other canyons. But
Hang on,
that
what
canyon was used to
size?
separate the city.
What size are we talking here? I mean, this sounds absolutely humongous.
It is, yeah, it is. And that separates what they consider the light side of the city, which is Emerald City, and the dark side of the city, which is where the giants were in that area. So,
Wow.
So what do they do in these cities? I mean, I know there's obviously nefarious things going on. Are people living there like humans, like humans? Are they just used to go up and down? Is it just a space that's created for the nefarious ones to do their dodgy things? What happens down there?
work.
Work.
That's, the best way to describe it is the inner beehives, where there's still the forced, tortured labor, whether it just depends on where in the city you are and what exactly the asset is that they're procuring is. But you have, a lot of different things happening there. You've got, the underground breeder programs. You've got the different things that they're experimenting and doing projects on. You have mass markets that people would not even believe exist that are happening down there underground. In some of the third world countries, those markets are more, or access to those markets is more readily displayed. But, there's just things that we're like, what? This can't be real, because we don't see it above ground. And we think, where do they get some of this stuff that they put in the movies? Where did that thought even stem from or come from? And, a lot of it is put out in the movies. They want to present it as a fable or as a myth or a story or as something untrue. And the reason they do that is so that if any of the survivors and victims who are underground make it to the surface, they want to be able to, discredit and cut their stories off from the get-go and have nobody believe them about these things.
Oh. So it's actually quite pretty. It's nice there. It looks pretty.
It does, yeah. Yep.
My question is, did they create it or did they find it and used it?
Yeah, I believe the land was found and they utilized it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's all for nefarious activities, these underground cities. It's not like there's a whole lot of good things going on there. They're
Right.
kind of concocting their concoctions there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that would be a good way to put it.
Okay, so that's Emerald City. Now, what can you tell us about, let's say, Valhalla? What would make Valhalla different to Emerald City and Mars? And what was the other one?
Ragnarok.
Ragnarok.
Yeah, they're all different. They all have different purposes and meanings. We got to look at overall that these are cities that are used, as a form of managing some of the systems underground or hidden assets. Um, so all of them are different and have different purposes. Valhalla is, they're in that Kansas area underground. And with that, they really, let me think of a better way to put this. But you have a city that goes, very deep. Um, I just remember that there were a lot of very tall walls in Valhalla, and these walls serve as kind of the gates, like where when you go into that area, there you have to get through the gates in order to get into that city. Um, there's a lot more of the connection with Valhalla, with um, that one connects directly to England, to the area and to some of the castles that are connected with King Arthur. And so with that, then you also have that direct connection to, what they would consider the Excalibur and the stone in the rock or the sword in the rock. And, I would also propose that because of that connection to the UK, that then it's also Valhalla is connected with two other cities directly connected to the UK, which would be Avalon, which is said to be the home of King Arthur, where you have the round table. So, where they would meet with other beings as well as the 12, those they call the 12 knights. And, so that's one of their spiritual gate cities. And then also Edinburgh, which is the backup, in the system. They will sometimes refer to some of these underground cities as Jerusalem or as Israel or Judah. Um, so they have different names for some of them that are interchangeable. But those ones mainly, were connected to some of the places where not only do they do rituals, but they have storehouses where they store their gold or precious artifacts or sacred artifacts, sacred relics. So Valhalla, there is traffic that goes through there, but that's not like a whole, like it, I guess I would call it probably more a fortress than necessarily a city, because it's not, Emerald City is more like what we would typically think of as a city, where you're going to see, a lot of residents, you're going to see people who are living there, but who are in bondage to labor. Um, you're going to have kind of that city feel. In Valhalla, it's more like a castle fortress is what you're going to get there. Now, when you get then to Mars, that's even more different. Um, you know, it's like you're walking into ancient Egypt there, but that's located under Area 51. And they have, I just remember as a kid seeing three massive pyramids that were under there. And, it's more like probably the Mayan or the Aztec feel when you go down there. Um, there's not like a lot of change of, you don't have that active city feel or technology necessarily. There is a lot of unique technology, but it's not like what you would find in Emerald City. And, that's a sacred place with Mars, where, they will have people there. Like we were brought there when they did some pre-ritual preparation for end time events. So that place is directly connected with some of those end time events that are supposed to come and happen. The closest thing, if you want to know what Mars is kind of like, I would encourage people to watch that fourth Indiana Jones movie about the crystal skulls. That is very similar to some of the things that I experienced there in Mars under Area 51. So the other shows that would be very similar to Mars would be the Stargate series. And, in there they have these beings that have, or humans that are hosts to these beings. You do get some of that weird stuff, where.
Okay, when you say
Yes.
weird stuff, can you please just expand on that? All right, I want to know
Like
what you mean.
worms that, communicate psychopathically through their hosts, yeah, you get weird creatures. That's all I can say. And
Are these all linked
but
to
I think it's
military?
fallen angels. But repeat that.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you because I find this so interesting. Are these things also are these cities all linked to military bases?
Those particular ones, yes.
So, what type of military activity goes on in these cities?
That is going to be a whole nother show.
You see, you're so bad. You're just lucky I can't fly through the Zoom camera right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of activities that go on with the military through those things.
Okay, then I think that would actually be interesting if we could at a later stage maybe touch on that, because I think for me more and more, just as I'm hearing about these things intuitively, I feel the military is linked to all of this stuff somehow. And I'm trying to understand the magnitude of the. I know it's big. I see the picture in front of me, if you know what I'm saying. But
Right.
I'm trying to get to grips with it step by step. And as I get more and more, understand more and more about what this has been about, for me, the military is everywhere. And I want to know how that is linked to this and how they operate as much as possible. But yes, as you said, I'll let you off the hook. Story for another day. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it goes to the world militaries, and we have to remember that the way that we've been taught, everything is separated by nations. And we're taught that each nation has its own military, which they do. But those things are just covers for what's really happening, I guess what we'll call the real world. In the real world, what you have is you have God's angelic army, you have Lucifer's fallen angel army, and you have mankind. With that, you have, other, I wouldn't classify them as other beings as in extraterrestrials or aliens. But you have other beings that also came about through the breeding of fallen angels and women, and that would be the Nephilim. So, that's what the world that I grew up in. And, so really it's not even the US military or the nation's militaries. you have the world governing military, which, the world governing alliance goes by many different names: the Satanic, the Druidic Council, the Galactic Federation, the Federation Alliance. And they split into many sub-chambers, both higher and lower chambers. So, who are some of the lower chambers? I would propose things that we see, like the Council of 10, NATO, the EU, the European Union, WHO, the CDC. All of these are lower chambers within that World Governing Council. So that's how it really breaks down. And, the military is just really an offshoot of those who are serving the council and who serve in their departments, so.
But if you just look at the whole structure of how that entire system works, and I'm not just necessarily talking about the war machines now, the actual military that fights and blows things up. I'm talking about the whole way that the entire system is structured. It's so militant. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's like, if you look at Satan and the way he likes to operate, right? It's very militaristic. You've got to have rank. You've got to have hierarchy. You've got to have bloodline. You've got to have all these things in order for you to have possession, right?
Right.
And if you just look at the whole royal family, everything is about military. All their parades and charades are about military. There's always the military element. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
and then,
interesting.
As we look further at that military, that's exactly what Ragnarok is in Antarctica, and it extends to Alaska areas as well. But now we get to your favorite part of the show, where we talk about, we'll call them mythical things. But, you ask what happens at these bases, what do they really do? And, it's a world that most people can't imagine. We've read it in fairy tales. We've, seen it on shows that deal about myths and, but some of the things that they do, besides breeder programs for humans, there are breeder programs in the system for creatures. And, these originally are, they're all creatures that God created. And we've been told that they're only myths, that they're fake, they're made up by somebody's imagination. But you have to ask, are things like dragons or unicorns or, Pegasus, or something, even some things more elaborate, are those things real? Do they exist? Do some of these creatures have magical powers or abilities? Why are they taken? Why are pieces of these creatures, harvested or used for certain high-level rituals or incantations? You've got this whole, I guess we'll call it a magic market, where, they sell very unique things. And, I'm always a curious person. So, I don't go into many for fun. I always, put oil on my shoes and go in for the purposes of anointing the land or property. But I encourage people, go into your local witchcraft paraphernalia stores. Look and see, what are they selling? What's on the shelves? You're going to find interesting things. You might find some things that are labeled, adrenochrome. One of the most interesting things you can find is something labeled dragon's blood, which is dried and then used in rituals. Where did that come from? Is it really from dragons? How is it used in rituals? What do they need it for? And if it's real, then we have to pose the question, are dragons real? We know scripture talks about them.
Okay.
Scripture talks about Leviathan and others. Go ahead.
So it's clear that there is all sorts of dodgy breeder programs occurring beneath the surfaces of our earth, in these underground cities. It's exactly what you're saying. I know we've kind of
Yeah.
touched on the dragons before, which really, as you're speaking, I must say my belly fills with dread to think about further levels of depravity that could possibly exist. So, is there anything you can tell us that you think we can deal with right now? Because I'm very aware that we do need, even those of us who are open to this kind of stuff, we do need to receive things in bite-sized chunks as well. So, is there anything else around that that you can reveal to us? Because it makes sense. Yes, I'm pretty sure. And I would love to actually do a decode or a deep dive into that with you. Is like with the dragons, for example, why do they need their blood? How do they harvest their blood? What do they use
Mm-hmm.
it for? I would like to go more into that at some point. I know it's not probably a topic for today, but
Yeah.
I'm certainly writing it down, Jessie. I'm not going to forget it.
Well, I'll give a topic of research for people. You can find a lot of things about. We've talked about Aquino and his work with the U.S. military. I'll propose a question. Why did Aquino name his computers, two of them, Glinda and Thor? We know Glinda is the good witch out of the Wizard of Oz. And where's the main place that um, story revolves around? Interestingly enough, not only do you have Emerald City, where the wizard is, but you also have Valhalla, Kansas. So, they don't say the exact area in Kansas. They say more Kansas City, but it's interesting that they still have Kansas in that area. So could it be, that his computers are strategically named for the purposes of keeping records and information that he was keeping as they did projects and experiments in these different areas? So what would that mean about Thor then? I would propose that Aquino did have direct interactions in Antarctica and Alaska at the so-called underground city Ragnarok, which is a subterranean military base, which means that the majority of that base is underground, under ocean ground, in those lower depths and underwater. So, I believe that that's the connection with Linda and Thor. And, were there other military computers that have mysterious names that connect them to these underground cities? I believe there are. And, so people can look into those things. He teases about those um, computer names. So, I would go back, do research, find where he puts out that information. Where does he state anything about those things? Because he was always coding information. A lot of stuff he put out is parodies, which are meant to be spoofs or jokes off of things. But his parodies really had a lot of parallels to things that were going on in the experiments and the projects that they were doing, especially with the Star Wars projects. And, not just Star Wars, you then have other projects like the Phoenix Project. You have, what was the other one I was just thinking of? The Jedi programs, and the special training that they did with the First Earth Battalion, and the think tanks. And I believe there's a lot of interconnections with all these things. And so,
What's
you know,
the first battalion? What is that?
oh, that's a fun one, Chantel.
Sounds fun.
Those are
It
the individuals who,
immediately
you know,
piqued my
another name for some of those trained by the 1st Earth Battalion are ghost warriors. These are the military that aren't seen, aren't heard, and do their warfare almost solely in the spirit and in the spirit world.
Wow.
So, you know, you're
Okay.
talking things where these people are trained to go into their extraterrestrial state, which means they can change or manifest their between their physical and their spiritual states at will. You know, they're able to manifest things physically from the spirit, and it gets really interesting. But yeah, look up 1st Earth Battalion, and you know, there's a direct link with them with the Galactic Federation. That's really who they're through, and so all of these things interconnect. You know, it's all just pieces of a big puzzle.
So these you call it shapeshifters if they're able to move between different states. I would imagine they could take on different shapes and forms in their bodies as well. If they're part of, like what you say, the ghost warriors, right? Are they actually physical in form? Do they take on a human form, like you and me, and just then zip
They
in and
are
out?
humans. Yeah, they are
Okay.
humans with a physical form, but they've learned to, you know, change the state of matter in their body at will. So it's actually one of the highest forms of blood magic and alchemy.
I was going to say, I'm just trying to figure out what type of energies would be used for that. And as you said, makes sense. Blood magic and alchemy. Yeah, where they can just, and it's obviously not done for positive purposes. Let's put it that way. This would be if you
So
are part of
I would say there are positive purposes sometimes that come out of it.
what would that be?
You have the good side that are, you know, protecting humanity and protecting the things that exist. And then you have the dark side that are, you know, destroying or utilizing those things for nefarious purposes. So you definitely do have a good side to that.
We
You
are
know,
we
the
not
good
talking the
side are
light
those.
side. So I'm just trying to differentiate between the good side and the light side, because I would imagine
So
this
yeah,
would
so the good side, we could say, with that, I use that term good loosely. I am speaking of the light side where, you know, they are fighting to preserve, to protect, to keep safe. You know, they're known as the guardians of those things. And so you do have that, you know, it's more time honored tradition where these people are born into families where, you know, you've got generational keepers um, of these things, and you know, guards of the secrets, guards of the secret scrolls or books that talk about these things. So you do have that light side of the system that is in direct opposition to the dark side in some of these things.
Okay.
Wow, it's quite complex, isn't it? When you really start looking at the different layers of this. So it really is, as you say, you know, working within that system, but still being good and pure
Yeah.
and what have you. Very interesting. I would love us to at some point as well. I know we've spoken a lot about the what was the first one? Looking
Emerald
Glass,
City.
Star Wars, and The Voice of God. I would love for us at some point as well to, yeah, look at these other programs such as the Jedi, the Phoenix, that sort of stuff. If you're open to it, but not now, in future programs as well, because I think these things are very interesting for me anyway, and I hope our viewers agree, because I think a lot of this is what they're imparting, as you say, well, into toys, games, sort of things, with the kids. That's becoming normalized. And what is one, where does one draw the line with this? And I think it's so
Yeah.
good to be able to at least understand what it's about. And we as parents or grandparents or whatever, at least we can know then what we're dealing with, because wow, this level of deception, it's bottomless, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I wanted to there was actually one thing I wanted to ask you. When you say these cities have always been there and they kind of took over them, now again, that interests me because I've been lately looking a lot at like the whole Tartaria thing, where it's very obvious that there has been buildings, technology from a long time ago that was harnessed in very different ways. Are we looking at something similar in these underground cities? Who
Let me
created
correct. I wasn't saying that the cities themselves had always been there or that God created those cities per se. I was saying that the land, like some of that underground areas like the rainforest and the different caverns, things like that, that's what has always been there, that they
Okay,
utilized that land and built cities and other things. But do I believe that technology goes back and is very old? Yes, like looking at cities like Atlantis and other things, we see some of that more what we'd call ancient technology, which was very advanced. We even see some of that in Israel or Egypt. How did they build the pyramids? How did they pick up rocks that were bigger than them? How did they move those things? Yeah, so
really interesting. You know what I'm just loving about the place where we're at right now is that these topics are no longer taboo. So whether you agree with them or not, I think there's one thing that is so important is that, and so true, is that we can realize we've all been lied to, right? So whether you agree with whatever narrative about any particular topic, I just think it's amazing that we are able to see, unearth, look at, and figure out and decide for ourselves, as humanity, what was true and what's not true. And I think it's such an exciting time for us to be discovering and rediscovering these ancient things. I'm very excited for that, I have to say. Wow.
yeah.
Anyway, Jess, I think, wow. Time flies when you're having fun. I think I
It
should do
does.
like a little jingle on that, because that's exactly how I feel every time I look at this time. I want to say thank you so much. I've found this so interesting, and we're definitely going to go into that more. Love to know anything, from our viewers as well. If you guys have any questions around this, and or if you have any like relevant information, because I think this is so important. It's not just tunnels and deep underground military bases where kids and just are being trafficked, and trains and things, whatever it is they do there. But I mean, these are thriving communities. This is a thriving economy. I mean, it's insane. And it's just like done on all these different dimensions and all these different ways. And we sit, having to put gas in our cars and complain
Right?
about how expensive. No wonder they don't care how expensive airplane tickets have become, right?
Right? They're not working off any of that system at all. That's just a way for them to make more money on us and make our life torturesome and
I
hellish,
mean, that's exactly. It'd be like so dumb. We just sit here, oh dear. We've got to go and buy a ticket. Take 3 days with hectic, what do you call this, jet lag?
They actually call those things incentives, Like, how do they get us to work and, make sure they're getting their bang for their buck, They give us fake holidays, we think family times, vacation time, and we have to work extra to request the time off and, make sure we get to have our fun time, and then we pay, you know?
I mean, oh, jet lag, jet lag, jet lag. We drag ourselves through many international airports, although we could be zooming through a portal. I mean, how cheeky is that? That is like just so selfish of them.
Right? Right? Oh, crazy.
I actually have a question for you, just in closing. What good do you think it does us as the average human being on this planet to know this information? Do you think that by knowing what's going on, we have the ability to change it? Because I do believe knowledge is power, but
Yeah.
power we can use in one way or the other. So that's always my reason for doing these extreme type topics, definitely,
Mhm.
because I do think that we need to know. And I do think that not everyone can handle it though. So now that we know what's happening in there, I mean, what do we do? Do we go like diving around for portals using our dowsing sticks to see where the portal in several cities? So we
You
want to go
gotta
check
learn
what.
how to operate those portals, Chantel, we'll work on that some more.
I'm extremely jealous. You do know how jealous I am about this, that these guys are in and out there. I'm like for years thinking, when on earth am I going to teleport?
We gotta hear you sing, Chantel, and Mornay, I'm sure, your beautiful
That's
opera
why
voice is
I
gonna open
can't.
all the gates at one time.
I can do that. I want to go save those dragons that they like mistreat, and all the children and all the creatures. I'm just thinking about,
Right.
there's like whole habitats, God's, like you spoke earlier about God's creation is creatures there. And what they do to the creatures above, just imagine what they do to the creatures below. So now I'm all in it. Now I want to go save the animals and the children down there. So let's portal away.
Yeah.
I'll,
The good news is that, I fully believe that our president has been, not the fake one, but
Mm,
the real one. Um, I believe that he and the good military have been doing just that. That, there isn't anything at a personal level that you or I or the average person can do. We're talking entire kingdoms built within
yeah,
this system that are strongholds. And, they've been generational strongholds for a long time. And it took armies to be able to take down this system and to really go after it in order to free people. And I believe that they've been working in conjunction with the Lord. That's the only way that the enemy's kingdom is going to come down, is because the Lord says, enough, your time that was allotted is done. And that's exactly what the Lord has said. Their time is done. And he said it's time to expose the evil. And he's been bringing that forward. So, what are the best things that we can do? Is that we're talking major spiritual warfare, that these individuals on the good side working with the Lord, it is a battle unlike anything that we've ever seen. And the greatest thing that we can do is really devote ourselves to pray and intercede for those individuals. God's given them special abilities, He's given them gifts. We know the Lord is with them, but it doesn't make what they have to see or experience any easier. Think through my stories that I've shared about, the things that I've seen and witnessed as a child, and then imagine, being the adults who go in there and who are seeing this stuff for themselves. Um, when you haven't grown up in that world and you're coming upon it, where you're seeing mass amounts of marketed humans, you're seeing the human markets, you're seeing the eating of the flesh firsthand, you know, um, those are not things that you can't take those pictures and those images out of your head. the smells, the sounds, the sights. So we really need to be in prayer for those people because, the things that they have had to do, um, the cost of freedom has been greater than most people could ever comprehend. Because, think about it, with true freedom, you know, um, the majority never have to know the depth of the evil that is really in this world. They never see that, they never hear it, they never truly comprehend it. And so we'll just pray the Lord bless those who have seen it. And God is so good that he gives us that ability to overcome those things. But those people still need to be able to, after the fight, come to that place of peace and rest and goodness that the Lord has for them. So just taking those moments to honor every day, upholding those who have paid the price, for the freedom of many. And I think that's a good place to end, Chantel.
I'm sitting here and I'm just, as you're speaking, my whole body is just getting beautiful chills because I think that's exactly, what touched me is that the cost of freedom has come at a very high price.
High price, yeah.
Yeah. And I thank God for people like yourself who have been brave enough to go there and see firsthand just how depraved it is. And that we have, in our own way, everyone, and I really bless everybody who has believed these stories, from not just you, Jessie, but thousands of other survivors and overcomers out there who have, for years and years and years, you would know, been trying to tell the world what is going on, and
Yeah.
being told you mad, you crazy, been locked up, been just, thank you everyone who has done that, because now the rest of us can finally cotton on and actually do something and say, wow, all right, well, maybe you're right, maybe you're not lying
Yeah.
after all. So thank you for that. And on that note, I think let's end in prayer, because I think everyone, there's lots of prayer that is needed at this point, definitely.
Yeah. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this great discussion, and we thank you for the time together. We thank you, or I thank you for the time to have a place and a platform to share the things that I have experienced. And I just lift up all those today who have and pieces of a puzzle and their own experiences, Lord. I thank you that you allow us to share these things, to validate one another, also to confirm and to prove to each other that these are real places, these are real things that we experience, that there is a system uh, that abuses people and causes horrific tortures and um, abuses, and they cover it up, Lord. And we ask that the time for cover up will end. We ask that literally that you will remove that veil and that you will reveal to the world the truth, because your eyes see everything that happens. You see everything that's going on. I ask specifically for those who have been in the military, Lord, those who have or who are bound under their service and their duty to keep secrets, Lord. We ask that there would be no more secrets, that all things would be laid bare and brought to the forefront. We ask for your judgments to go forth, Lord, that where evil has been committed, that you will bring your righteous judgment. We ask that the evils that have been committed will not continue from our generation to the next. We ask that we may continue to be faithful in all that you've given us, so that we may end these horrific abuses for the next generation. And we ask that our generation may be those that raise up the children, that raise up your banner of love over us, and that we may be the generation that brings in the victory of your hand over evil, Lord, as we watch the system fall and crumble. And we thank you that your every thought towards us is always for good, that your desire is for that we may be blessed, that we may have a future and a hope. And so we thank you for that. We take hold of that, and we use that as to stir our hearts onward in this fight. And we ask that you would increase our endurance, increase our perseverance. Let us keep pressing forward until we have taken hold of the prize, which is freedom for all, Lord, life for all, goodness from the wealth of your storehouses for all. We thank you for the work that you did on the cross. We thank you for your precious blood, which has made us a kingdom of priests. We thank you for your work that gives us the authority to go forward in your name and to right the wrongs that have been done by this evil system. So we thank you for all these things and ask that you would help us to continue to stand bold in that authority, because you have made us those who have the authority to govern and to steward this kingdom and this earth. And so, Lord, we just take that full responsibility to do that. And we will be faithful stewards of that. We thank you and we praise your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Jess. Wow, it was lovely. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us again for another amazing connection with our beautiful Jessie on Aquarius Rising Africa. If you haven't already, please give us a like, share, subscribe, share, all over. Thank you so much, and we will catch you very soon again. And God bless you. Take good care of yourselves. See you soon. Well, hello everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the beautiful world you are. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. And it's Wednesday with our beautiful Jessie. But before we move on to Jessie, we have a sponsor for our show today, who is Spooky 2, our beautiful sponsor that is in China. Our little energy machines, and particularly this week is the little mini magic, which is in fact, I do believe I feature in the ad halfway through, so I'm not going to say too much about that now, but really is an incredible little machine that if you have acute pain, works with vibrations, work with frequencies. My mom's been working with mine. My friend who's had a bad fall and literally had to actually have surgery on her shoulder and her knee. Didn't. She healed herself and is now doing the rest with this little machine and having incredible results. Really, it's the frequencies. Amazing. We've been doing interviews with these guys for a while and really incredible. So check it out if you want to. If you guys are interested in looking at that, you can use my name, Chantal, as a coupon code. You get less 6% for the live show, otherwise 5%. So check it out. It's natural medicine. The frequencies are really based on frequencies from nature. So really amazing little product. But without further ado, we are here with our beautiful Jessie, and it's Wonderful Wednesday. And we are talking the inside of the castles and white rabbits today. Now, I've always been dying to know, as a little kid, I mean, these castles never stopped fascinating me, I'll have you know. So I've been dying to know about what really happens on the inside of the castles. And I know we try to get pics, but it seems the internet has definitely been scrubbed of the inside. But Jess, you explain things so beautifully. And that's one thing I've loved listening to you over the years, because as you speak, I can really paint the picture in my mind. So I'd love to hear about some of your little stories and things and what it's like there.
Yeah. So, it's interesting that, once you start going to these castles, especially because I was there, during specific times where rituals or certain training things were going on for myself, um, there was a lot of things that I began to pick up, a lot of, um, seeing patterns in the structure and the way, why they built things or put things in these castles in certain patterns. Some of those things, I would notice that every single room had at least one mirror or multiple mirrors. And, I soon found out that that was because, these elite use mirrors, several different ways. First, they can use it as, kind of that gateway or doorway to access the spirit world. So imagine as a kid, you've seen people use those mirrors to go through them. And the next thing you know, you're someplace that, is not your regular home. You're having to stay at one of these castles or, a palace, and you've got like 3 mirrors in your room. And, and a lot of times I would put coverings over them, but even with that, like, I knew that that wouldn't keep people out. So there was always just, in everything that I saw there, there was always that sense of never really being safe, never really being alone, um, always having to be on high alert because I never knew what to expect in any situations. Um, Now, when you look at the overall layout, those rooms with mirrors are very specific. A lot of the ones that are in the bedrooms are used more for monitoring, a witch can stand in any room in the house or even farther off. They don't even have to be at that palace. Through their magic, they can access those mirrors and use them to view and look and see what's really going on. But they also use it as a form of communication through the spirit world with one another. So they don't even have to go through, they just have to speak to, or, they could go in front of. And that's a lot of, they would use the black mirrors to access some of the deeper realms. And, as we notice, like, as you go through some of these older castles now or palaces, um, I encourage you, look at the glass in the mirrors. Over time, it begins to lose the clearness. Like, the more those mirrors have been used, they begin to age, and you'll notice around the edges and stuff, the mirror starts to blacken and kind of get this gray tinty. So it's no longer like clear glass. And,
Wow.
I think that that's because it reflects a certain type of light. And as it's being used with our spirits, which are light going in and out, um, it begins to lose all of those ways that it was refracting light in the first place that were so clear and pristine. Um, but in that world, what's more interesting is that, you know, the clearer mirrors are not necessarily the more prized mirrors. Um, it's the older mirrors that they look for, and usually witches or warlocks will have their mirrors for a very long time. And they'll look for, like, if they're purchasing mirrors sometimes, they won't go out and buy a brand new one. They will look for those older mirrors. So, um, some of these old fables that we hear, like um, Snow White, that was really the first fairy tale where the Grimm brothers were bringing out the truth about how the witches use mirrors in their witchcraft. And what do we see in there? The witch spoke to that mirror. They don't talk about the spirit that's behind it, or that's working through it. But basically, mirror shapes were very important. We know in the system and in Solomonic magic that square or that rectangular shape can also be used on the floor. Like think about foyers or rooms that you walk into in these elite mansions where they have checkered floors. Those are the same squared checkered floors that you see in Masonic lodges. And it's very purposely done because that's their sacred space. And in fact, many of those Masonic lodges will build, kind of like a dug out area underneath those checkered floors, and they will use that as a ritual doorway to go into another space. They call those ritual squares, and that's going to be where they're going to, if they're summoning demonic spirits, they're going to summon through those doors or access points that they put on. They can also be circular. It just depends on kind of the layout, the design, and the different types of energy flow and magic that they're trying to do. One of the other things that you see in a lot of these older castles and palaces is you'll see the really dark mahogany wood furniture, or like the emphasis of that mahogany wood, and you'll see like a red velvet or kind of that dark red color as the main color for the furniture and the walls. And you'll start to notice, like on the wallpaper, that many of them have these designs that we've come to see as just, oh, it's just a design on the wallpaper. But a lot of those designs were reflective of different meanings in the system. Like they would have little, florets. Like if you think of the floret that I've talked about belongs to the priory. So some of them, will have that floret, and then they'll have like another shape that goes up, and then like a kind of headpiece, so that it almost looks like a woman in a dress. And that's purposeful. Those became to represent some of the different bloodline families, to be able to tell the difference if it was connected to, the Russian, the Italian, the French, or the Germans, some of the other main lines. Going back to the red furniture, that was actually used for very particular things when I was a kid. A lot of times in the studies or in weird hallway alcoves, they would put a random, dark wood chair with that red coloring on it. And what I would see as a kid was then, at night I would wake up and like if I was there in a room practicing for ritual prep, all of a sudden I would start hearing somebody speaking in a trance, and there would just be kind of creepy things that would begin to happen. And as I walked out into those hallways, I would see people sitting in those chairs, and whatever it was about that mahogany wood, it allows high-level witches and warlocks to be able to channel spirits. So they would sit in those chairs and use them for channeling. So that's why you see a lot of that.
I'm very interested to just ask you this question. Obviously, that's happening in castles. Now, I mean, I look at my family and also the old inherited furniture, the mahogany wood, that wallpaper, the dodgy mirrors. So I'm wondering, does this just happen only in castles, or is it possible that if we are seeing this and kind of through just the normal average person in your home with this kind of inherited furniture from 27 generations up type thing, and the wallpaper, that creepy wallpaper, it just gives me the creeps to even think about it. It really, I've never liked it. So when you're talking, it makes me think. Is that, and especially someone, I was born with seeing these things beyond the veil.
Right.
So I'm wondering, and I used to see a lot. So I'm wondering, help us out there, just for the average person who
Well,
has.
what they did was they made it popular. They began to mass produce those designs and things. They might use a little bit cheaper wood that's going to go into the average home. That's where they got into a lot of staining the lighter woods with the dark stains, so that people felt like, they had that cool design that they were seeing, but it was actually, it's like ineffective. It doesn't work the same in every situation. With the mirrors, and actually, they went beyond the mirrors. George and I have talked on the Reveal Report how, those mirrors then morphed into phones, into TVs. You've got that black screen. They achieved being able to put that not only in the homes of the majority of people, but literally where you carry that with you at all times. And why do they do that? So that you can constantly, they know exactly where you're at, they know what you're doing. Um, so it became a form of monitoring. Some of the things that I would see was also a lot of these old mansions would have they would have a very teeny tiny room. Usually it was off of a staircase, or kind of, seemed like a little closet that they would set aside. And they would put, the older telephones in there. And George and I also have brought out on the Reveal Report that those initially were used for contacting the dead. So those little areas would ironically be very close. Either, they would build a room then that would be like this big breakfast alcove. And so somewhere that breakfast alcove would be either above that little phone room, or it would be like on the side. It would be somewhere close to there. And the reason that they did that was because in those breakfast alcoves, usually they would have a big, massive round table, and, they would pull people in and do seances in those tables. Um, the phone contact or connection actually was a safeguard. It wasn't necessarily so they could call up and hear the spirit. Why they would put those rooms in conjunction with each other was because as they're doing the seance, sometimes you get unruly spirits. Instead of it coming through being the loved one that person wants to hear, you get something that starts to do massive paranormal activity, right? So the phone actually was a distraction. Like, they would use that as a form or means to control unruly spirits. They would call them then to that place, get their attention, and that allowed them to close whatever portal or door they had opened in the room above. At some of the other, like some of the major castles where that happens, they also have a few other safeguards, because sometimes you get in these, seances or different things that they're going to do, you get witches and warlocks that are going to fight with each other. And so they would have the rooms with the multiple mirrors, and they would put the Sisters of Light, who were the, you know, there's two kind of security teams. Many of them would have protectors who were their own personal protectors. Usually the protectors, maybe one or two of the highest elite would have their protectors in the room with them. But the majority of the time it's just understood that there's only certain places you can battle. And if you have a problem with an individual, you can't just come out in a random room and attack that person. Like, you have to go, pull them into the different, designated battlefields for your level within the system. But they would have the Sisters of Light there as backup for some of the different rituals that they would be doing. And so they would be sitting in, a nice living room that is filled with mirrors, and that's so that, they could help protect, but also they would be watching. So they're going to be using those mirrors to watch the property. They're going to be watching for any random people who are coming onto the property. They're going to know what's going on in almost every single room in that palace or mansion, because there's that mirror connection. So, they could even make sure if, that palace had slaves or servants that were serving, they're going to make sure that no random servant is just wandering through the hall, wandering into this ritual. So it gets really interesting.
What you're saying, sorry, what you're saying is, in order for them to look through the mirrors, they don't actually have to be there. They can be looking remotely from another location.
Right.
So what do they need to connect to the mirror? How do they connect to the mirror? Is that all just done via their sorcery, or is there anything
just
physical?
through sorcery. And it's, they have something that allows them that spiritual access.
Okay.
These people have learned to use the glory or the light that God's given them. And, what is magic? It's basically entangling with something at that quantum or molecular level. So, we're talking magic with a K, like, the elite spell it, not magic with a C, which is more of illusions, tricks, kind of a sleight of the hand, distractions of the eye. With real magic, Solomonic, Enochian, blood magic, these people know how to transfer their state of body where, they can turn into that spirit state and, enter into that spirit world through these portals or doorways.
Wow.
Yeah. So it gets interesting. One of the castles I spent the most time at for ritual prep was Neuschwanstein or Neuschwanstein or
Neubenstein, as I call it.
We can call it whatever, but I grew up just calling it Neuschwanstein. So, with that one, the layout's very interesting. A lot of the ritual prep was done in that main tower off of that main entrance. There's a massive sanctuary in there. When you go in, it's actually not that big. But that's what, they've got the painted ceiling with the 1,000 lights. And that was the access portal. When you're doing magic in there, that literally would open up at night where, you wouldn't see the ceiling. Instead, you would see the sky and you would see the stars. So they, probably the it was one of the first rituals where, I was about 5 years old, and I just remember walking up that stairwell um, to the upper room in the tower, and it, didn't necessarily look like it looks now. In fact, like now they have that stairwell kind of painted in some areas I've seen, but I just remember, it kind of being cementy um, looking, and they had us, walking in groups of two, and there were Sisters of Lights and then the Mothers of Darkness, and that was the only one. Usually they don't allow males up there, and I'm not sure why they particularly allowed my training partner up there, but he was the only male that was up there. And they had him stationed right next to the door as you come in. And I think that was because, they knew they were going to be summoning a spirit, which was actually Ashtaroth, or as they called her at that time, the Queen of the Dead. And they were trying to connect me to that Queen of the Dead. And I think they wanted him close to that door so that if she attacked, like they could literally just shove him out. Um, but so they drew a pentagram on the middle of the floor, and that's what they had laid me down in. And at first as a kid, they don't sit there and say, okay, now you're going to lay on the floor and, you know, this good fairy's going to come and, you really want to talk with her and make a connection. They don't tell you anything. I'm just laying in this pentagram, and, there's candles. The Sisters of Light are, singing, and, I see the ceiling open up and I can actually see the stars, and you're kind of like, cool, like what's happening? Next thing I know, I hear this little scratching sound, and I sit up and I'm watching this evil looking, grotesque thing come through the ground. I mean, she looked like a gross mummy. Um, and I was just like, oh, heck no. It's like, no, 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 that's not going to happen. And as she came out and started coming at me, like I literally stood up in that, pentagram, and the only words that would come to my mouth were one of the songs that I knew, that was the Bible. And I just started singing, actually I was speaking at the Bible. Yes, that's the book for me. I stand alone on the word of God, the Bible. And, I kept going at her with that song because she recoiled. And so, that connection was not made. Now, what's interesting is that part of the title for the Queen Mother of Darkness is they'll be called the Queen of Heaven, which is also a term that the Catholic Church uses to speak about Mother Mary. So that's kind of ironic, isn't it? But the Queen of Heaven is literally, the host at times for Ashtaroth. So that's when they use that term, is when they're opening themselves up to be that host for Ashtaroth. So there's that duality that they put between the good, supposed good, and the evil. So that was one of the rituals. I remember, like, as we came up and then went down the stairway, we all had candles in our hands and we had robes on, as we walked in twos up that stairway. And it's a pretty tight stairway. But everything is so methodical. You have this group of women, going up that stairway together. Underneath ground in that area, I've talked about, that underground, there's this massive battle arena. And, like the side of that arena wall is actually the cliff wall or the cliff face on the one side. and it looks out to that area where there's kind of a split, two, it's like kind of two pieces of the mountain there. And I can remember as a kid that they used to have a wooden bridge that went across that expanse, and I would absolutely pitch a fit. Like, I did not want to have to walk across that bridge, and the wind would blow, and at certain points, because it was wood pallets on the bridge, it would make this clanking sound when the wood would blow. So as the wood hit the face front for that cliff, or I'll say for both sides of that expanse, maybe be a better picture. And they had like kind of a dual. It was smaller in length, but they had a similar wood bridge like that in Yellowstone, and there was a spiritual connection between the two areas. And so I had gone through some different things with the wood bridge there at Neuschwanstein, and then we went to Yellowstone for a family trip, and my proctor and family were trying to get me on that bridge, and I was like, no. And what had happened was that I would have visions, that I didn't know the fullness of what I was seeing, or how to handle it. But I had a specific vision that somebody was going to die. And so I was just like, no, like, I'm not going on that. And the one in Yellowstone, again, like, I refused, and threw the biggest fit. And a week later, they took a school trip with a classroom of children across, and one of those children fell off and died. So that was, and it was shortly after that was when they actually made the more solid, secure bridges. They took those wood bridges down. But I can remember that. And so that arena, the windows were a little higher up, but you could, if you were up on some of the archways that, like around the arena on the one side, it's got like a 2-level archway, and that second level, like a lot of the Sisters of Light, would sit in those archways during the battles, and they also would usually have candles and lights, like the swinging lights, and so that would be the light that was coming into that area if the battle was later at night. So it would always have kind of like this misty, dark feel to it. They would also, some of them would have incense, like the incense balls that the priest in the Catholic Church uses. So they would be putting frankincense in the air, which then would also give it that kind of foggy type look in there, as they were doing their battles.
What type of battles took place there? Can you tell us?
Yeah, it would be usually battles for positions. So if it was a high priest or priestess that was wanting to graduate to become a grand high priest or priestess, like if somebody was older and was stepping down, or somebody had died, then they could battle to see who would step into that position. So it's always offered whenever somebody, dies or steps down, that position or seat for the quadrant becomes open. Some of the other things with that, you had I witnessed the protector battle there. I only experienced the one, so I'm not sure when they decide to do that or how often that happens. You kind of have some different things with that. I'll say, like, the specific one I witnessed, they were battling for positions. So you had 3 different levels of protectors. You had, the ones who were active protectors who were adults. You had the ones that had already been through some of the training that were called the junior protectors. They were kind of like their teenage to young adult years. And then you had the children that were being trained into that position. And they were on teams. So, it was like you had an adult, a junior, and a child all on one team. And then they were battling each other, and I think it just kind of gave authority or jurisdiction right. One of the individuals I've named who was the Wheaton chief of police at the time, that's what I knew him as. He was the head protector at that time. And, the end of that battle, it came down to him and my training partner. And that's when my training partner ended up, he beat him in battle and he became the head protector. So.
And he was how old, your training partner?
He was about 7 years old.
And
we have to remember that his grandfather, was our lead or was our defense magic trainer. He was a Nazi, and that was Michael Karkox. So, we went through intense training with that, with defense magic and different forms of combat, stuff like that. So
Harry Potter.
Yeah, and it wasn't, when I say combat, we're not talking necessarily physical, even though there was a lot of physical combat that we were put through, but the majority of it was connected with different forms of dark magic, that was used in protection or in offense.
So who would watch these battles? I mean, is this like a red carpet do? I would imagine like the carpet's out and everyone comes in their little long black whatever it is they're wearing, and sits in
Not
their position.
necessarily black. It depended on their position and what the ritual or the battle was about. They could be in white if there were hidden, what I found out later were the hidden marriage ceremonies that were going on. They would fight sometimes for certain vows or covenants between one another. It could be red, the Sisters of Light. They had 3 different outfits. Actually, I'll just say, all the members had usually 3 different robes. So it just depended on what you were called to, which one you would wear. But they were either red, black, or white, were the ones that I was used to. And sometimes some had gold or green or blue. When I saw those ones, usually they were more like a witch's cloak, and usually they were made out of a velvet type material. Like for me, there were times like when I was in certain areas, like when I first started off as, areas that in the military that were connected to CERN, they would have me dressed in this little outfit that I mean, it was like one of my favorites. I didn't know the full extent of all the meaning with it until later. But that was one of the times, like, I had to wear my hair, try to have it straight. And they would you're going to laugh at this part, Chantel, because we've talked about the hair. But, it's like they would try to have, like, my hair, was short. And they try to have it so that it would, like, curl and, like, be flat like that on my face, right? And I had this bleach blonde hair. But my hair did not work that way. The one side refused to curl all nice and curl in. And instead I'd get like this wispy stuff that went up, right? And it didn't help that my training partner, he would sit there and he would like, all of a sudden he'd like go like that with my hair, which then would make it more static and more wispy, right? And I would look at him and just be like, you know, and I'd be in this blue velvet. The outfit that they had found for me, I was the only one that had kind of like a V neck in mine. And um, and it had like some little like a little cat pattern on it that you could barely see, but it was there, you know. So I thought I had this cute little outfit with a little kitty on it, and it had come with a skirt and pants. And I liked it because I hated wearing those, you know, the dresses when I had to wear them in the system. So, you know, it was like, yes, I get my little blue velvet pants and I get to wear my little boots and, you know, not the little patent dress shoes that they'd have, you know, make me wear with those lacy socks, you know. um, that would drive me crazy. And they eventually went to tights because they couldn't keep me in those socks. You know, it was like, no, those don't go with those shoes. And I hated those. You know, I still think the only reason they have those patent shoes, here's the deal. When you walk with those things across like wood floors or, you know, kind of that's, you know, uh, not waxed, but that's the, you know, polished cement, right? What do those little patent shoes do? They collect static electricity. And I think that's really the only reason they have all those little girls wear those shoes, is because it creates this environment with a lot of static when they're all together.
I
You
believe
know,
it. Wow.
so I mean it's horrible. So
I can imagine.
but
Wow.
what the purpose was with those, with that blue velvet. You know, I found out later that they would that a lot of times in especially the Norwegian hierarchy, which, you know, I was Norwegian bloodline as well. You know, my father's side is Norwegian. So that's where, you know, I connected back some of the, uh, you know, witchcraft stemming from my dad's side, even though his family was not active in it, they still had descendants that went back. But they would, so they used this as part of my cover as a child, especially when I started working in the military, because, you know, they hid me in that Masonic system as a little boy, even though I wasn't, like they wouldn't necessarily advertise or say that, but for those who didn't know, you know, who I was, they would see me with all these groups of little boys, and we're all dressed in the blue velvet shirt and, you know, the pants and stuff. And so they didn't catch that, oh my gosh, that's actually, you know, the little queen successor, mother of darkness. So when I didn't have the robes on, often they would kind of like try to blend me in. So it wasn't there, you know, I'll clarify, there wasn't any gender stuff going on for me. They weren't trying to push that. It simply was with their cover. They would try to bring me into these programs with a group of boys
Boys.
initially. And that was for the looking glass experiments. And then as I graduated further, that's when girls started to be added. Um, and then there was like no more hiding my identity. So think about that, you know, where is the looking glass experiments are highly connected to CERN, which at the time was primarily run out of Switzerland. Um, you know, so when you look back, you'll even see Switzerland, because of that Scandinavian descent, they would often dress the little boys in that blue velvet too. So that was part of the, you know, I'm not sure of the full extent of that, but it's just kind of funny thinking back, you know. Um, And then, during those times too, instead of my ritual name, which was Sunshine, they would still sometimes refer to that, but they actually, hid my name even where they would call me Sunny and use my protector's last name when they were referring to me if they used a full name and made it seem like we were brothers. So in the lodges and stuff, um, you know, that's how they would refer to me. So it gets really interesting why
Why
they
would
did certain
yeah, I was
things.
gonna
Well, there's more to that. The interesting thing is that, the sun in that culture, what are they really doing? They're honoring the sun and the moon. They're getting into all sorts of, in their magic, worship of created things. And who was, the god of the system, for the majority of the world, they made it, look like, that connection to Ra or the sun god. So most people, that were kind of lower levels at that time, they're expecting that the head of that system is going to be male or masculine.
uh-huh.
So that was part of, they hid, the truth of what was going on for the lower levels. Um, yet as you get to the mid levels, the majority, those high priest or priestesses, they didn't know exactly who the mothers of darkness were, but they would see them appear at rituals. They would come in the 4 times a year when everybody's together, very distinctly. Those mothers are going to march in together and take their seats at thrones, and then Satan would appear and take his seat on a throne. So they would see that procession. So those procession, that arena down in Nerschwestein, sometimes you would see that, you know, the gathering for some of the different rituals, um, or ritual events, or if he wanted to come for a certain battle. Some of the brides of Satan would engage in those battles for positions, and that's more where you would see Satan appear for some of those battles.
Wow.
Yeah. So
How
then I want to get into a fun story, but I'll let you make your comments first.
No, I'm just fascinated by that. It's amazing. Here we sit in this world oblivious to these things going on. Kind of happens in storybooks with Hansel and Gretel.
Right.
Not right in front of us, but very fascinating. Yes, I know you've got some very cool stories as well about those times. So please share.
Yeah. So some of the other castles, I was there during times for ritual hunts. We've talked about those. Um, some of the elites, they may not use a castle at that time per se, but they would have hunting lodges that would be connected, or land, um, that would be forested areas that would be connected to those castle areas. And like when you looked at kind of the layout, a lot of, like especially in the England area, or, Scotland, Ireland, they would build the land areas where they would have a castle or a palace or a mansion. And that would be where, whoever had the title or the authority over that land, they're going to reside in that castle. And then, there would be other homes or buildings that are going to be built in that property. And those would be the people who, were hired to work the land, or caretakers for the palace or the mansion. And, so what would happen is that sometimes with these, big massive hunts, they had to ensure that, the people that they were hiring either were very distracted on days that they're going to have that, or, they were aware that those hunting parties were taking place. Um, I believe that the majority of those workers very quickly found out, what was going on, and in order to survive or live, they had to accept what was going on and just be thankful that they weren't, uh, being put into those hunts. Um, so some of those houses, then, I guess why I brought that up is because some of those houses were places that people who kind of escaped out of the main perimeters for those hunts would try to run. So, later I would run into people who had survived the hunts, and it was because they would, find or get their way into some place that was around, but it just meant then that they would be put back into those hunts at another time.
Because
So,
there's no escape, is there? There's really no escape.
no, and if they did, they would just be put back in at a later time or season. Um, some of them became quite good, which then they were kind of the prized, you know, stag for those hunts where, the elites would target them all the more because they really took pleasure in that wickedness of hunting. Um, so just a moment to reflect on that. God bless each of those major, survivors that endured more than one hunt. But um, you know, so certain times of the years, the bigger mansions, palaces, they would put on those hunts. Um, you know, and it was one of those, and I just know, I don't know where it was, but I know it was a Rothschild property. And it was more of a, the outside I remember being that gray stone, um, a very elaborate kind of palace or mansion, but at the same time, it was kind of what I would say more of the outside of it, looked more like a fortress kind of. And there were two front doors to this place. One was kind of off to the side, and then it had the more elaborate door, which, as people came in for the parties, they would drive up and they would be let out, and they would go into this big, foyer that then opened up into bigger rooms, where, not like bedrooms or living rooms. It was more like the social, where there were you'd go towards the back and there would be like this big ballroom type area that would open up into the back gardens. So that side door, though, that actually, like when you went in that, there were these cement type stairs or stone stairs that would go down into this long hallway that had these old doors on each side. And those older doors were kind of, I guess what I would say, I'd seen them in some of the older Catholic churches, where it was, these big, heavy, thick wood doors that then had actual metal on the doors in the shape of a cross. And, so I just remember there was at least, there was a couple doors on each side. And then if you went up, like at that foyer, there also was a stairwell that went up. Um, and it was kind of like a half stairwell. It wasn't as long as the other one. And that went into those, like a hallway that connected to that main entrance area. So anyway, that was the door that the children were allowed to go in and out of. And like I've explained before, we would always use Encyclopedia, who was a Rothschild, to give us the tour. So, he had given us a tour and had just kind of mentioned that hallway and told us a story about that there was a graveyard down there. and that he told us the name of the individual who supposedly, had been a single older man, more like a priest, and had said that, there was something about a toy, and that, he had described the toy that it was like this carved out old little wood horse that had been painted white, and, that there had been a little soldier that could go on top of that horse, and that, a little boy who had lived in the palace had died. He was about 3, maybe 4. And so when he died, they buried that horse with him. And, he'd even told us that for whatever reason, the little boy had been buried in that grave with the old man. And we're like, what? You know, but of course, then you've got call him little big brown eyes, who was the little 1-year-old that we would, because when they did these hunting parties, you would have the expendable kids that would be released outside. So the elite who were able to go after the expendable kids would be doing that. But then you had the older elite that, may have been losing some of their ability. They're not as fast, they're not as agile. And so they didn't stop the hunting things. What they would do inside is, the hierarchy children, like they weren't allowed to be killed, but those older men and women would then hunt them. And if they caught you, you would, quickly find yourself in a bad position where they're, raping you, doing sex magic. So, you know, that was the perimeters of the game. So whenever we were there, we were always in the inside of the house. And, me and my training partner automatically would go for little brown eyes, because he was just, a little guy. He was just like 1. And, so we would then hide him with us wherever we were. So, he hears the story and he's like, I want the horse. So, of course, we had to comply, because he's just, those big brown eyes. He was so sweet. And so we decide to, make this little escapade and go adventuring. And sure enough, we didn't do it with encyclopedia. We waited till he had wandered off. So it was just me and my training partner, one of the other Rothschild boys and brown eyes. And, we go escapading down there, and we find, sure enough, there's a graveyard. So when we got that, it was, along the left side of that wall. We got that opened, and it was very interesting, because it was almost like all these like bigger pebbles. So the whole floor under there, and it extended wide underneath the house. So you had this, big graveyard down there with multiple graves, and all of it's like in these pebbles that are the top. It was laid out where, you have walkways, and then, there would be like squares that would have like 6 graves. You'd have 3 on one side and 3 on the other facing each other. So I don't know if they were buried in, family units, or kind of how that worked. But anyway, we find the one with the name on it, just like Encyclopedia said. So we were excited. And the way that the headstone was, like it was this, massive cement, or I'm not sure what the material is, but it's like this slab of stone that's laid over the grave, and then you have like a stone cophagus that the body's laid in that area and stuff. And so we jimmied off that stone and had got it, like we couldn't get it all the way off, but we had just got it enough to the side so that we could see in. And I just remember the first, as we pushed and we got that kind of off to the side, we saw that there was that this man, like it was this old, his clothing was kind of like this, I don't even know what the material was, but it was like this white kind of tea colored type of material. And he had red shoes on, red leather shoes. So that was very interesting. Up until then, we didn't see a lot of individuals that wore those shoes. But that was interesting. And so sure enough, there was 2 skeletons in there, and the one was a small one, and we did find that toy. After we didn't necessarily get caught down there, what happened was that all of a sudden, like in the back part of that graveyard, we all of a sudden started hearing this roaring of an evil spirit, and it was like this, like, oh, that was getting louder, and we just looked at each other, and it's like, we got to get out of here. But one of the boys with us, he was like, you gotta, I think Encyclopedia had come down at that time and had found us, and he started, pitching a fit and was like, you gotta put it back, and we're like, oh no, this is ours. And we start to hear this spirit, and we're like, we got to get out of here. And he's like, no, you got to put everything back like it was. So we're trying to push that slab back into place before, we have this confrontation of whatever's coming. We finally start running out, and he's like, you got to lock the door. And we're like, forget locking the door. And he's like, no, you got to lock it. And so we're trying to lock it and stuff, and then he goes running with the light. And so, so then it leaves me and my training partner and little James at that time, down there in the dark, and we're trying to lock this door. And then we turn, and I could feel little, brown eyes hair. So I'm like, trying to run with my hand on top of his head and his shoulders, in front of me, kind of pushing him. And then I've got my training partner behind me pushing me. And we're like trying not to trip over each other. And we finally get like up into that main platform where the door was. And luckily, like Encyclopedia had stopped there, and he had opened that door a little ways. And he saw his dad coming through, or coming to that top stairwell. So just as we get up and we kind of turn, he shuts that door, and his dad's like, what are you guys up to? And we're all like, oh, nothing. We just came in from outside. So it was like the timing on some of that stuff was, we would have been creamed if we had been caught with that. Later, I did see the toy. I think that the boys got caught with it because later it was in Jacob Rothschild's library. He put that on his shelves, and so very interesting.
Wow. We are going to take a little ad break before we go any further. So, Borne, if you can just get that for us. Thank you.
I am a natural health practitioner. I usually don't endorse any technical product, but this is something special, and that's why I wanted to say a few words about this. It's called Mini Magic, and it works on electromagnetic pulses that actually have such an effect on our body to rejuvenate the cells. And there is a lot of scientific research behind it. So I started using it one day when I really got severe headache, and I would put these 2 round things on my back here, and I would go to bed and rest or sleep. So within half an hour or an hour, I felt my headache goes down, and in 3 hours I was ready actually to get up, and it was late in the night, but I was still hungry, so got up and I didn't have any more headache. So that's one of experiences. I recommend for everybody to use it.
But I have to tell you, my mom, she's been using it for about 5 days now. And she had a finger that could not move, and she's generally in very, very good health. She's in her early 80s. One of her fingers could not move. After a night of putting this on, for the first time in a decade, she can move her fingers. Not only that, what really impressed me, and over the next few days, she placed it on her bladder, her back, and within a few hours, she was fine. But more than anything, I got to see how her energy changed. She's a vibey mama. What can I say?
We're glad she's able to get up and around and not have any pain.
And her fingers are moving, and guess which finger it was? The wedding ring finger.
Wow.
And now it's perfect. It's amazing. It's incredible, actually. Anyway, I would love to hear. I'm just checking the time here. We have another show actually after this on solutions. So I'm wondering, we were going to do the white rabbit as well, Jess. How much time do we need for that? Or should we keep that for next time, maybe? I'm going to, because
maybe
we've still got
keep that for next time. And
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you then maybe just to wrap up with something again from the castles. Interesting. I had one question, and I know we've touched on this before as well, but I'd like clarity again. In those battles that happen at these castles, obviously there's a lot of wounding and what have you that goes on, and you've often told us in the past that these wounds are healed by the little
witchy hands. Actually, it was more like
flying around with their little wands and go zap zap. I mean, I'm wondering, do people actually get killed, like dead, like dead, real dead in these battles, and get brought back to life? Or do they get killed and then can't get brought back to life, but then get told that it was a heart attack or an accident, or especially if it's a well-known person? I'm just interested to know, how do they deal with that?
Yes, depending on the situation, and if you got to remember that these people are fighting for power, and power over their region, their area. So I witnessed a lot of, I guess the overall emotion towards each other would be disdain. They had that fakey nice where, they would make alliances. They would, you'd have your covenants, your vows, your contracts with others. What that did was, those that aligned with you, then you would be able to use them or their spirits that they worked with in battles, or to help yourself if somebody was coming against you. But, this is the biggest world for betrayal. They'd make these alliances and contracts, but really, they're not, loyal to anybody except for themselves. They always will guard and protect themselves above all else. So, so it could be both, or all those things that you mentioned.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm not big on that fakey nice,
Yeah.
I actually found out later in life that was why, I grew up with so much of that, where, they would be giving each other compliments, but it's almost like they're gritting their teeth, and their compliments would be, like the one I would get all the time was, aren't you, don't you have a memory like an elephant? Or, and I would get that because I would be repeating back stuff that they didn't want me to repeat back. but it wasn't necessarily a good thing. You know, so they
Yeah.
would give those fake compliments, especially about beauty or people's appearances or looks, but behind it was the coveting, the jealousy, the envy, the hatred. You know, you knew that if they had the opportunity, they'd be ripping that beautiful dress off that person just to have, you know, just so nobody had the dress. Um, you
Yeah.
know, so it's like,
Mm.
um, you know, I realized later, like I have trouble, you know, giving compliments just because it was something I wouldn't do because I saw so much fakeness of it,
Yeah.
you know.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Wow. Wow, Jess, another amazing show. And I'm sorry, guys, I did think we were going to be doing Alice today, but you're going to have to wait for next
have
week.
to wait.
Just think how exciting that's going to be. We've had a fantastic show today anyway. So please catch us at 4:30, which is now 5 to 4 yeah, for us. So we're going to take a half an hour breather, and then you're going to catch us on Solutions with Aquarius Rising Africa, where Jess will be talking about the importance of testimonies and survivors and overcomers actually sharing your testimonies at the moment, or not only at the moment. It is so important because a lot of the survivors are being silenced right now. And there's a huge, massive army of harassers out there that are completely annihilating a lot of the voices. So this is a very important topic, because the more voices that are heard, the more people that speak, the more safe people like Jessie is, you know, the more the testimonies get out there. And just please, on that note, let's please just keep Tom Althouse in our prayers. He's having a really rough time at the moment regarding this type of stuff as well. So even more reason why we talk about this topic. So please join us at 4:30. I don't know, Jess, what time will that be for you again?
We'll just say 9:30 Eastern.
Okay, 9:30 Eastern Time, 4:30 GMT +2. And on that note, Jess, thank you so much. Won't you just end for us in prayer, please?
Absolutely. Father, we thank you that we can look back at our past, at our experiences, and we can pick out the good things, the memories, that it's okay to have those moments of laughter, those moments that are more lighthearted. We thank you for those, and I thank you that I'm able to impart some of the knowledge, some of the inner workings of the system, and the meanings behind things. So I ask as we go out, Lord, that you would just continue to bring that healing, that you would continue to bring every individual to the place where they're able to use their life stories and experiences as a blessing to others or as a means to help others through their situations. Let us be mindful to build one another up, to invest in one another, and to help each other to become the best that we can be. So we thank you for that, and we ask for that in your precious name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Thank you,
All
Jess.
right. Blessings.
Thanks,
Thank
Monet.
you.
See you
And
shortly.
thank you to our beautiful viewers. Always such a pleasure to have you guys up joining us here. Love to see you in the chat. Scotty, Colleen, Courtney, all the, and there's someone in Japanese or some Oriental. I don't understand. You always have very pretty face, and I like that you're always giving beautiful comments. I don't know what your name is. I have no idea how to pronounce it. Let me see you. Thank you so much. God bless you guys. Mwah. Take good care of yourselves. If you haven't already, please just like, share, subscribe. These are so many important things to share at this time. Let's keep the faith. Let's stay together. Let's put out the positive vibes, and we'll get through this. God bless you all. See you soon on Solutions. Jerry, bye.